What happened to the four children of Elizabeth Taylor? That question echoes far beyond the glare of red carpets and the weight of diamonds. Because when your mother is not just an actress but a legend, when she's Cleopatra, Maggie the Cat, or Gloria Wandress, your childhood isn't just a private story, it's an inherited epic unfolding under global scrutiny. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed queen of Hollywood, lived a life too large for even the widescreen. 8 marriages, 2 Oscars, a fragrance empire, and the pioneering AIDS foundation that bore her name. But behind the magazine covers and tabloid headlines, she was also a fiercely devoted, occasionally overwhelmed mother, trying to raise 4 children across 3 marriages, global sets, and the madness of fame. And those children? Each one would grow up in the shimmering shadow of a woman the world never stopped watching, each charting their own course, some in silence, some in art, and some in the very heart of the legacy she left behind. The story begins with Michael Wilding Jr., born in January 1953 in Santa Monica, at a time when Elizabeth, barely 21, was yearning for calm after her whirlwind first marriage to hotel heir Nicky Hilton had shattered her illusions of romantic rescue. Michael Wilding Sr., a reserved British actor 2 decades her senior, offered a gentler rhythm, cups of tea, poetry readings, a soft counterpoint to her Hollywood whirlwind. Their union produced Michael Jr. and later his brother Christopher. But the marriage dissolved by 1957, leaving Liz to raise 2 boys in a world where privacy was fiction and cameras never stopped rolling. Michael Jr., with his quiet demeanor and striking resemblance to his mother, especially in the eyes, tried the family trade first. He took roles in soap operas like Guiding Light and made appearances on Dallas and in Deadly Illusion during the 1980s. But the truth was, he never really chased the spotlight. Instead, he carved out a completely different identity. Literally, he became a sculptor. By 1991, Michael Jr. had left Hollywood for the dry peace of Santa Fe, New Mexico, immersing himself in stonework and letting the natural silence of the desert replace the noise of celebrity. His sculptures, shaped from civic marble, bronze, and limestone, weren't about flash. They were about form, presence, and permanence, in stark contrast to the ephemeral nature of movie stardom. His art earned critical respect, and through it, he passed something deeper to his children. With 3 kids, Layla, Naomi, and Tarquin, Michael Jr. built a quieter legacy, one not built on box office returns but on shaping something real, grounded in his own. Naomi Wilding, his daughter, would later become an ambassador for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, while Tarquin has spoken movingly about carrying forward his grandmother's philanthropic fire. And in a poetic turn, their efforts reflect a deeper truth. Even if Michael Jr. rejected the spotlight, his children found purpose in honoring the very woman who spent her life navigating its glare. Then came Christopher Wilding, born in February 1955, just before the cracks in his parents' marriage became unfixable. Though Elizabeth tried to shield her children from the chaos, boarding schools in Europe, high walls, security, Christopher remembered it all: the cameras outside the house, the classmates sneering over tabloid headlines, and the surreal experience of reading about your own mother's love life in the pages of Life magazine like a stranger looking in. Unlike his brother, Christopher rarely stepped in front of the camera. Instead, he built a quiet technical career behind it. He worked in sound editing and as an assistant director on films like Overboard and Tombstone, and even took small roles in movies like The Shadow and Judgment Night. But his path was never about celebrity. It was about skill, precision, and craft. He married into another world of wealth, wedding Aileen Getty in 1981, with whom he adopted 1 son, Caleb, and had another, Andrew. After their divorce, he remarried Margaret Carlton and had a 3rd son, Lowell. For years, Christopher stayed almost entirely out of the public eye, making his first television interview about Elizabeth only decades later in the BBC docuseries Rebel Superstar. There, his honesty was striking. He spoke not just about her beauty or fame, but about her fragility, her regrets, and her longing to have been a better mother. He remembered the fame as a deal with the devil and acknowledged that even Elizabeth knew she had paid a steep emotional price for everything she achieved. And yet, in his role as trustee for her estate and steward of her legacy, Christopher remains deeply involved, helping preserve both her art and her activism. It was Christopher who took legal action to protect her possessions during a high-profile auction, ensuring that the proceeds supported AIDS research, just as she would have wanted. His quiet sense of duty, far from the glare, reveals a different kind of love, a protective, enduring loyalty shaped not by the lights of stardom, but by the weight of surviving it. But just as Elizabeth Taylor's world seemed to steady with two boys, Michael and Christopher, life would again tilt, this time with joy and tragedy intertwined. On August 6, 1957, in New York City, her only daughter by blood arrived, Liza Todd. Barely 7 months later, Elizabeth's third husband, producer Mike Todd, died in a plane crash. Liza would never know her father, and for Elizabeth, that wound never truly closed. She carried that grief with her, Christopher would later say. You could feel it in how she held Liza, like she was holding on to something fragile, something she couldn't afford to lose again. Liza's early years unfolded inside an orbit of cameras and champagne flutes. Her baby photo with Elizabeth made the cover of Life magazine. Her birth weight even made headlines. But the press never captured what really mattered: how Mike Todd's sudden death left Elizabeth hollowed, and how that pain shaped the way she mothered her daughter. Eddie Fisher arrived quickly after the crash, stepping into the vacuum. And then came Richard Burton, with all his fire and fury, who not only married Elizabeth, but adopted Liza as his own. He wasn't just a figure in Liza's life. He was Dad. She called Mike Todd her father. But Burton was the one who read her bedtime stories and held her hand through childhood surgeries. Because Liza was born with a congenital hip defect, one that required over 20 operations. Elizabeth once said, "I want her all the more because she's ill. Maybe I can do something to help." That sentence wasn't public relations, it was a vow. But the Hollywood world didn't slow for surgeries or growing pains. Liza, like her half-brothers, spent parts of her childhood on film sets, surrounded by lights, grips, and the smell of makeup powder. Unlike them, though, she never tried to mimic the glamour. Instead, Liza quietly studied in Switzerland, enrolled at Hornsey College of Art in London, and then continued her education at the Otis Art Institute in Los Angeles. While Elizabeth lit up the screen, Liza was learning to carve truth into bronze. Years later, she would sign her sculptures Liza Todd TV, and those who saw her work, especially her animal figures, remarked on their empathy. Her horses had muscle memory, her calves had soul. Unlike her mother's global spotlight, Liza chose stillness. She built a life in upstate New York, surrounded not by photographers, but by goats, mud, and casting clay. In 1984, Liza married artist Hap Tivy. They had 2 sons, Quinn and Reese, and though the marriage would end in 2003, the family never fractured. Quinn, in particular, would later emerge as one of the most active torchbearers of his grandmother's legacy. When Elizabeth passed in 2011, it was Quinn who stepped into the public eye, not with glamour, but with purpose. As a trustee of the Elizabeth Taylor Trust and a leader at the AIDS Foundation, he spoke not about diamonds, but about compassion. "She was grandma," he said once. "She made us laugh, and she never turned her back on anyone." That wasn't a press quote. That was a grandson speaking truth. Liza, meanwhile, remained silent in public. She rarely, if ever, referenced her mother's fame. And yet you could see Elizabeth in her profile, her eyes, the determined stillness. Liza had inherited her mother's grace, but wore it like armor, not jewelry. Then came the youngest, Maria Burton. She wasn't born into the Taylor bloodline. She was adopted from Munich, Germany around 1961, originally while Elizabeth was still married to Eddie Fisher. But it was Richard Burton who completed the adoption and became the father figure Maria would grow up with. Maria's life was never ordinary. From the beginning, she struggled with a severe hip condition that required nearly 24 surgeries. Doctors said she might never walk properly. Elizabeth didn't blink. "She's mine," she told people. and I'll help her walk, even if I have to carry her the whole way. Both Liz and Burton stayed fiercely involved in Maria's medical care. In public, the Burtons were tabloid gold. In private, they were sleep-deprived parents learning to massage joints and manage post-op pain. As Maria grew older, she showed an eye for design and creativity. While her siblings chased the arts from the stage or the editing booth, Maria moved behind the scenes. She co-founded the Carson Organization, a boutique talent agency, with her first husband, Steve Carson, and later worked in fashion and philanthropy. She preferred control over attention. But what makes Maria's story especially compelling is how fiercely she protected her own children from the circus she had once known. She had a daughter, Elizabeth Eliza Carson, in 1982, and a son, Richard McKeown, born around 2001 with her second husband, Tom McKeown. Maria made sure they were raised not in the roar of fame, but in the safety of distance. And yet, her daughter Eliza would still grow into one of the most visible ambassadors of the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. Some things, compassion, strength, just seem to pass down whether you plan it or not. Maria remained largely quiet in the public arena, but when needed, she stood beside her family, whether at her mother's 75th birthday tribute or accepting Richard Burton's posthumous star on the Walk of Fame. Maria, the child born of no headline but raised in the storm's eye, ultimately forged a life of steadiness. If Elizabeth was a whirlwind, Maria became the anchor, and in that, she honored her mother in the most profound way. As the spotlight slowly dimmed on Elizabeth Taylor's final years, the stage she left behind was far more than the sets of Cleopatra or Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It was a complex living legacy stitched into 4 very different lives, each child a mirror reflecting a different piece of her. Yet none of them, Michael, Christopher, Liza, or Maria, tried to wear Elizabeth's fame like a crown. Instead, they navigated around it, built with it, or quietly resisted it altogether. Michael Wilding Jr., the eldest, stepped out of the camera's glare early and found peace in the silence of sculpture. He didn't give interviews or tour studios. He chipped away at stone in the New Mexico desert, uncovering form the same way his mother uncovered character, layer by layer, patient, deliberate. And still, when Elizabeth needed someone to walk her down the aisle one last time, it was Michael who took her hand. That single moment said more than 100 magazine covers. Christopher Wilding, quieter still, chose to shape stories from behind the lens. The sound editor, the technician, the man who knew exactly how loud a voice should be before it overwhelmed a scene. In interviews decades later, he didn't boast or dramatize. He remembered, and he forgave. She tried, he said of Elizabeth's motherhood. It wasn't easy to do. That honesty, simple, undramatic, and generous, was perhaps his greatest tribute. Liza Todd, who lost her father before she could speak his name, carved out her own silence. Her art never asked for applause. Her sculptures spoke in bronze, each piece a quiet rebellion against the chaos of her childhood. She didn't chase her mother's light. She forged her own metal and taught her children that legacy doesn't have to be loud to be strong. It can whisper, it can endure. And Maria Burton, adopted into a maelstrom, scarred by surgeries but raised by one of the world's most watched women, became a guardian of boundaries. She didn't try to rewrite her mother's story. She rewrote her own. A designer, a philanthropist, a mother who pulled the curtains closed so her children could breathe. And still, she let her daughter, Eliza Carson, carry forward the work Elizabeth began, publicly, proudly, and without fear. What happened to Elizabeth Taylor's 4 children? They grew up not as celebrities, but as witnesses. Witnesses to a life lived louder than most people could imagine, and to a woman who, for all her diamonds and divorces, fought with more grit than glamour when it came to protecting her family. They were shaped by the spotlight, but not consumed by it. They carried pieces of her, Michael's sense of beauty, Christopher's precision, Liza's solitude, Maria's compassion, but they carried them their own way. And maybe that's the real ending here. Not in the tabloid headlines, not in the Hollywood glamour, but in 4 very different lives that quietly say, Elizabeth Taylor may have belonged to the world, but she was, above all else, their mother. If you enjoyed the story, there's more where that came from. We'll be exploring the private, untold family stories behind the biggest names in Hollywood. So don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.